Hi guys, welcome to Simply Scuba. So the holiday season is finally upon us, so people are traveling. So we're going to be looking at two different travel regulators. So regulators come in kind of two different styles. You get the traditional style, which can be a decent size and kind of clunky. But then a few years ago, brands started to make a sort of a compact, slimline version of their regulators, something like the Apeks Flight, which are just sort of scaled down regulators. They do the same thing, but they did have some little caveats that's worth noting. And because there's now quite a few different travel-ish regulators out on the market, I figured we compared two of them. I've chosen two from Apeks because they have come a long way since they very first came out. So I've got the Apeks Flight, which is really a dedicated lightweight travel set. It's basically a set of regulators just scaled down. And then we have one of their newest regulators, the Apeks XL4, which is also a kind of lightweight stripped down sort of travel regulator, but they've put in a few different twists, which I think will intrigue you. So we're going to compare these two, see which one is better, and sort of make some recommendations, which one is good for what. Let's take a closer look. Okay, so let's compare the hardware, the kind of the looks and feels of the regulators. How's best to do that? Let's just go from stage to stage and sort of pit them against one another. So looking at the first stages, so we've got two very different looking first stages. So this is where the XL4 differs from the Flight. The Flight has its own dedicated first stage, and this is very lightweight. A lot of it on the outside is plastic. So actually, if you remove this cowl, it's a little bit smaller. I've got the DIN version here, which is nice and compact. This is the lightest iteration of it. And the first thing that really separates the two is that the Flight has two high pressure ports, whereas the XL4 only has a single high pressure port. So if you're diving with an analog gauge and a wireless air transmitter, you're gonna have to choose or get a splitter or something. So in that sense of sort of hose routing and sort of hose options, the Flight is already off and leading. Where the Flight falls down is in its cold water rating. So the XL4 has this sort of big bumper cap, which acts as a environmental seal as well. So that means that contaminants and water can't get into the first stage. And just underneath that, we've got these whopping great big heat sinks. So they are just absorbing all the heat from the surrounding waters, because first stages get pretty cold, especially in cold waters, and cold and water makes ice. Ice is bad because it stops things from moving in a first stage. So the XL4 is actually cold water rated, so you can use this at home and abroad. With the Flight, it's only rated to go above 10 degrees Celsius. So if you are diving in colder temperatures, then it's worth leaning in this direction. As far as weight, there is quite a bit of difference. The Flight is specialist. It's real cut down. It's designed to be lightweight so that you can travel with it easier. Whereas the XL4 is a big chunk of metal. So granted, this is the A-clamp version, so that's got all the extra weight. I only had an A-clamp to hand, but even the DIN is a little bit heavier. Not a great deal heavier, but it's still heavier. Moving down from that, we're going to the hoses. So they're both braided hoses, which is better than the traditional rubber hose. It's a bit lighter, they're more flexible, they tend to have higher burst pressures as well. So for traveling, again, it's a benefit. They're not long enough to have the problem with them being too floaty. We do have two different hose protectors. We got the traditional one on the Flight, which is a little bit longer. And then on the XL4, we got these cute little stubby ones. I kind of prefer the new stubby ones. They're a bit more modern, but it's up to you. A lot of people don't even use them. Moving down to the second stages, I'm only going to look at the primary because the Octo is the same thing but yellow. You're not going to see a great deal of difference between these two other than aesthetics. So the first thing that bugs me about the flight is in this female thread here. So this is a dedicated sort of screw thread. It's a ratchet style, and that's only on the flight. So switching this hose can be a little bit tricky, and that just means in the long terms, just makes it quite hard to swap that hose over. On the XL4, it's a bog standard hose. The standard sort of thread, that's like 9/16 or something. You can pick that up anywhere. You can pick and choose. You can change the color. You can do whatever you want to that hose. Whereas with this one, it's a bit trickier to find a replacement hose. So then going on to the main second stage, mouthpiece is exactly the same. You both get exactly the same reusable cable tie. Very useful. The exhaust tee, exactly the same. They're both the same sort of semi-rigid, flexible exhaust tee, same size and everything. The front cover is much the same. The body, pretty much the same. Adjustable venturi, the same. The only real difference is in that front cover, but still you've got a rigid sort of purge button on the front compared to a rigid purge button on the front. This one's shaped a bit more like a shield, whereas this one's round. That's about it as far as aesthetics. They're pretty much the same second stage. There might be some small sort of tweaks on the inside, but none that most people notice just breathing from them. So as far as aesthetics and the kind of looks and feels to it, it's tricky. If you are just after the lightest regulator, then look at the flight. If you will ever be diving in colder waters, then the XL4 is definitely worth looking at. The first stage, this is the real powerhouse of the regulator. This is what's doing all of the work. So it's definitely worth sort of investing in a nicer first stage. And this is cold water rated. You can use it in warmer waters. Okay, it weighs a little bit more, not that much more to make it prohibitive. So the main difference really comes down to the extra high pressure port on the flight. It's not the end of the world. You just have to kind of choose between an analog gauge or a transmitter, or you just have to invest in some kind of splitter. So yeah, that's kind of it as far as the aesthetics, the materials. They're all pretty similar in level pegging. There's a couple little differences in there, but let's look at the main specs of the regulator. Okay, so now down to the nitty gritty, the sort of specifications and the kind of raw facts. So to start off with, we're going to be looking at the weight because that's the real defining factor of these two regulators. So the first stage themselves, the flight weighs 340 grams. So that's very much the lightest first stage out on the market that I am aware of. XL4 weighs 638, so almost twice as much, but we're still talking about 200 or 300 grams. So that's not a great deal. That's a tiny little weight. So that's not a massive deal breaker, but if you're looking for the lightest regulator out there, it's a consideration. The second stage is, despite them being incredibly similar, each second stage, so the primary and the octo, these weigh 127 grams on the flight versus 154. So they are a tiny little bit heavier on the XL4. A lot of that's probably down to the metal hardware sort of on the sides compared to the plastic hardware on the flight. Again, it's only tens of grams that we're considering sort of in that weight change. One other big change is that the XL4 first stage, so this is overbalanced. So that means that as you descend, it can deliver more gas the deeper down you go. So you're never going to be restricted if you ever need to donate gas sort of when you're at maximum depth. The flight itself, this is just balanced. So it'll just maintain a constant supply of gas no matter what your depth is. And the second stages, again, they're all balanced as well. Other than that, we're going to look at the price. So it was hard to find a price for like because they come in stage 3 and stage 4 sets, and the stage 4 set, they get different gauges. So I've just done it as a primary and a first stage, so ignoring the octo. The flight is £433 recommended retail versus the XL4 at £349. So the XL4 is a little bit cheaper, and that is definitely a sort of a selling point for me because it's cold water rated. Okay, it is a little bit heavier. Basically, the first stage is a bit simpler, which is why they can sort of cut some costs. And again, with the sort of hosing and all the different sort of moldings and whatnot, makes it a bit cheaper. But as far as specs wise, the only place where it kind of falls down is, granted, it's a little bit heavier and it doesn't have that extra second high pressure port. But let's sort of compile all that information together and think about our final thoughts. Okay, so boiling all down, these two are very similar regulators. The main differences are the first stage, the connection into the second stage, and that's kind of it. The XL4 is significantly cheaper, but it is a little bit heavier. It's not prohibitively heavy though. You can still travel with it, but you can still dive at home with it, which makes it a real big selling point. So as far as basically, if I was going to be a traveling diver, but I do want to dive at home, I'd be going for the XL4. If I was going for a pure lightweight travel regulator, because I already have cold water regulators at home, I'd probably look at the flight, but I'd probably lean towards the XL4 again, mainly because in the long run, you can still swap those hoses over really easily. The first stage won't need quite as much maintenance because this is environmentally sealed, whereas the flight isn't. So that means that contaminants will be getting inside the working parts. It's not the end of the world, it just means that you have to flush it out and wash it a bit more thoroughly because salt and whatnot can build up on the inside, and just means that it needs a bit more servicing a little bit often. Other than that, there's not a great deal separating the two. The second high pressure port, not a huge selling point for me, because you can get splitters. The XL4 Plus, I believe, comes with a second high pressure port in its first stage, so it might be worth going down that route. But yeah, I'm leaning towards the XL4. Granted, it's newer, it's modern, so they've made all those kind of benefits and twists. So this is kind of the upgraded version of the flight, but the flight is still in production. If you are really shaving the grams and making it as lightweight and sort of compact as possible, yeah, the flight, definitely I'd recommend. I'd also definitely recommend the DIN. All of the weights today have been for DIN first stages. They're a lot lighter. If you go to a place and they don't have DIN fittings on the cylinders, yeah, you can just get an A-clamp adapter. But touch wood, most places I've been to around the world have had DIN cylinders, so it's not been an issue for me. But of course, let us know in the comments below which one you prefer and why. Do you use either of these regulators? XL4 has been on the market a good year or so now, so quite a few people should sort of have it and use it. Flight's been around for a good 5+ years, so yeah, I definitely know that people have been using that. But let us know in the comments below which is best and why. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and of course hit on that bell icon, because then as soon as we upload a video, it will tell you in your inbox. Thanks for watching and safe diving.
We are an online dive store serving the UK and the world for all your diving equipment needs. So why not visit us at simplyscuba.com or click the box on your screen.